Hello class, welcome to Unit 2.1b, Solving Equations with Variables on the Same Side. So let's take another look at the difference between simplifying an expression and solving an equation. Remember, when you simplify an expression, this is referring to the one side of equation. And this typically refers to things like combining like terms and distributing. This allows us to get all of our x's and all of our numbers combined so that way we can prepare ourselves to solve. Because when we talk about solving an equation, we are now working with both sides of the equation, and this is where we get to use our inverse operation and these properties of equality to solve. And again, to talk about inverse operations, don't forget that's just like your operations that undo each other. So you're multiplying and dividing, adding and subtracting. Sometimes we talk about inverse operations just by like the opposites. Alright, let's take a look at a few examples. Alright, example 1. We got 2/5 x plus 2 equals 10. So when we go to solve, remember we're always trying to work away from our x and get rid of some values like add 2. So the first thing we want to do is subtract 2. This is our subtraction property of equality. Remember that if you do it to one side, we're doing it to both, which would leave us with 2/5 x equals 8. Now again, if you guys like to draw the line down the middle, feel free to work with that. When we look at 2/5 x, well, that's multiply. So our inverse of multiply is typically divide. And then this fraction part, 2/5 divided by 2/5, well, we don't typically divide fractions, right? Remember when we talked on Thursday that we were talking about that is really just multiplying by the reciprocal. That way these fractions essentially reduce down to a 1. So when we solve this problem, let's multiply by 5/2 and solve. So that allows those to reduce to a 1x. And then we really just got to figure out what is 8 times 5/2. So multiply your numerators, that's 40. So x equals 40/2, which simplifies to x equals 20. Now again, do not forget to check these, plug them back in, and does 2/5 of 20 plus 2 equal 10? It does. Alright, let's look at another one. Example 2 has your negative x plus 4 in the numerator of a fraction, which remember, that's kind of like its own group there. So even though we're trying to tempted to maybe subtract 4 first, this is one where we need to get rid of that divide 3 first, kind of open that top half up. So if it's divide 3, we are multiplying by 3. So that way we can simplify those, leaving us with a negative x plus 4, and that's going to equal 15. Well, once we get to that, that is your multiplication property of equality. And now we can subtract with our subtraction property of equality. And that's going to leave us with negative x equals 11. Now if we see a negative x, well, easiest way to get rid of a negative is just divide both sides by a negative 1. That's a negative divided by a negative is positive, and a positive divided by a negative makes our answer negative. So that would just be a division property of equality. Once we get to x equals negative 11, don't forget to just plug back in. Now this is a negative 11 plus 4 divided by 3 equals 5. So really that turns into a plus 11 plus 4, and then that leaves us with a 15 divided by 3 equals 5. Looking at example 3, this is the first one where we have a lot going on the one side of the equation. So this is going to be a prime opportunity to make sure we simplify. When we simplify, the first thing we see here is the distributive property, where we can distribute that negative 4x Negative 4 times 2 would be negative 8, negative 10. So that first step there is your distributive property. Next thing we can look to do here is simplify. We have two like terms in our negative 8 and our negative 10. So subtract those together. And at this point we got done the simplify. Remember, the biggest thing about simplify is they're on the same side. We don't want to be using any inverse operations until we start solving. So now that we have everything simplified, now we can use those inverse operations. Subtract 18, add 18. All right, because before that step, everything on the left side was already on one side, so we don't have to use any inverse operations. So now, let's see what we got. Negative 18 plus 22. That looks like a 4. And negative 4. And then when we have a negative 4 times x, that means let's divide by negative 4. So we are looking at x equaling 1. And again, always take a second to go back up into that original equation, plug it in, and is that going to give us our answer of negative 22? And we're good. We forgot to add those properties in, so let's just do that real quick. This was our addition property of equality, and then we used our division property of equality. All right, that's the next one. Our last example of the day, looks like we got two things to distribute. The first half of this, make sure we're distributing that 3 times x, 3 times 2. And then when we have this negative, be careful. We do need to distribute that negative sign. So negative times a positive, negative times a positive, gives us negative 4. And then it allows us to simplify. So we did the distributive property. We are going to now combine like terms. So 3x minus x, 2x, and 6 minus 4. That's a plus 2. And once we get to this step, again, this was all simplifying. And as long as we're simplifying, we are not doing anything with inverses. But now that we are switching to solve, this is where we can use those inverse operations and use the subtraction properties of equality to solve. So if we got 2x equals 10, and again, if we have a multiply, we are dividing, so we're using that division property of equality, and x equals 5. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit more intense, but make sure you plug it in. Use your calculator. Make sure you're plugging in those parentheses. Make sure we're plugging them in. If we do that all correctly, we should be able to plug that in, let our calculator do our work, and confirm our answer. Okay, take a minute to solve through these 4 problems using what we know about simplifying and solving equations. Good luck.